The blade was at her throat when Cassian threw himself between them, and in that heartbeat, steel catching moonlight, his brother's eyes widening in betrayal, he understood he had just destroyed everything he'd spent 20 years building. The woman behind him gasped, her breath hot against his shoulder blade through the torn fabric of his shirt, and Adrian's sword trembled in the air, caught between brotherhood and the oath he'd sworn to the Duke. "Move aside, Cassian," Adrian whispered, and it was the brokenness in his voice, not the command, that made Cassian's chest split open like a wound. But he didn't move. He couldn't, because 3 hours ago he'd discovered the woman everyone called a traitor was carrying a secret that would topple the entire duchy. And it wasn't treason, it was love. The Duke's own love. And if she died tonight, so would any chance of redemption for them all. Wait, before the next confession unfolds, if this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. The courtyard of Greymont Estate was never meant to witness such violence. Cassian had played here as a boy, chasing Adrian through the rose gardens, while their father, the old Duke's master of arms, drilled formations into young nobles who would never see real battle. Now the roses were winter bare, and the stones were slick with evening frost, and his younger brother was looking at him like he was a stranger. "She poisoned Lady Marguerite," Adrian said, each word measured and cold. The woman, Lady Seraphine Ashford, once the most celebrated beauty in the duchy, now a widow with haunted eyes, pressed closer to Cassian's back. He could feel her shaking, not from fear, he realized, from rage.
"Tell him," she hissed. "Tell him what you found." But Cassian couldn't. Not here. Not with half the Duke's guard assembled in the shadows, waiting for Adrian's signal. Not with his own reputation as the Duke's most loyal knight hanging in the balance like a man on the gallows. He'd earned that reputation through blood and sacrifice. At 17, he'd taken an arrow meant for Duke Thornwick during the border revolts. At 23, he'd uncovered the plot that would have put a pretender on the ducal throne. At 28, he'd personally executed the man who'd tried to assassinate the Duke's children. He was 37 now, and he was throwing it all away for a woman accused of murder. "Adrian," he said, keeping his hands visible, away from his weapons. "Give me 1 hour, just one. Let me explain what I've learned. Explain it to the Duke, in chains. Both of you." Adrian's voice cracked on the last word, and Cassian saw the tears his brother was fighting. They'd never been apart, not really. Even when Cassian had risen to captain of the household guard and Adrian had chosen the Duke's intelligence corps, they'd remained each other's compass. Their mother had died bringing Adrian into the world. Their father had followed her 6 years later, trampled during a cavalry drill gone wrong. They were all each other had. "You don't understand what's at stake. I understand you're protecting a murderess. I understand you've lost your mind." Adrian's sword steadied, finding its killing angle again. "Last chance, brother. Step aside or fall with her. I won't ask again." Seraphine's hand suddenly gripped Cassian's belt, and before he could stop her, she'd pulled his dagger free and pressed it to her own throat. "Then you'll have to explain to your Duke why his prisoner died before trial," she said, her voice steady as a bell. "And why the evidence I've hidden will never surface. The evidence that proves Marguerite poisoned herself." The courtyard went silent. Adrian's sword lowered an inch. "That's impossible. Why would she?" "Because she was dying already," Seraphine said. "Cancer, eating her from the inside for 2 years. She had perhaps 3 months left, maybe less. And she couldn't bear for her brother to watch her waste away. So she chose to die swiftly, dramatically, and frame the one woman who dared to speak truth to her. "That's a desperate lie," Adrian said, but his certainty was crumbling. Cassian could see it in the way his brother's shoulders had tensed, the way his eyes flickered to the manor's darkened windows where the Duke grieved. "It's not," Cassian said quietly. "I found her physician's journals this afternoon, hidden in the chapel library, in a hollow book of psalms. Dr. Fenimore documented everything, the diagnosis, the prognosis, the pain she hid from everyone. And I found something else, letters, dozens of them, from Marguerite to Seraphine. Apologizing for what?" Adrian's voice was barely audible now. Seraphine laughed, a broken sound like glass chimes in a storm. For loving the same man she did, for winning him, for being chosen. The pieces fell into place behind Adrian's eyes. Cassian watched his brother understand, watched the same revelation that had struck him like lightning just hours ago now ripple through Adrian's carefully constructed worldview. "The Duke," Adrian breathed. "You and the Duke were—" "Before his sister ever noticed him," Seraphine said. "When we were all just children playing at the summer estate. Sebastian loved me first. But his father had plans, and those plans required a strategic marriage to a neighboring duchy's daughter. I understood. I married Lord Ashford because it was expected. But Marguerite never forgave me. And when my husband died last year, when Sebastian was finally free to acknowledge what had always been between us—" She trailed off, the dagger trembling against her pale skin. "His sister made it impossible," Cassian finished. "She threatened scandal, threatened to reveal old indiscretions that would destabilize the duchy. So the Duke kept his distance, and Seraphine kept hers, and everyone pretended there was nothing but air between them."
"Until Marguerite got sick,"
Adrian said slowly.
"Until she realized she was forcing her brother into the same prison of duty that destroyed your happiness."
He looked at Seraphine with new eyes, seeing past the accusations to the woman beneath. She wanted to set him free, but she couldn't just die quietly. There would be questions, investigations. Her physicians would reveal her condition eventually, so she staged her own murder to look like a crime of passion. A jealous widow eliminating her rival's beloved sister.
"Making me so radioactive that Sebastian would have to publicly condemn me, distance himself completely, and in doing so, finally be free of her shadow, free to marry whomever he chose after my execution, with no one to whisper about old flames and inappropriate attachments."
Her voice broke. She was trying to give him permission to forget me, to start fresh. "Except Sebastian would never forget," Cassian said. "I've watched him these past 3 days since her death. He's not grieving his sister. He's grieving you. He knows exactly what Marguerite did, even if he can't admit it. That's why he won't see you, won't take your testimony himself. Because if he looks you in the eyes, he'll break. He'll confess everything and destroy his own carefully built reputation in the process." Adrian lowered his sword completely. His hands were shaking.
"Why didn't you come to me immediately? Why this theatrical confrontation?"
"Because you're loyal to the law above all else," Cassian said. "And the law says Seraphine is guilty until proven otherwise. The law says she stands trial, faces the testimony of lying witnesses who were paid by Marguerite herself to seal her story. The law says she hangs at dawn in 3 days, and the Duke says nothing to stop it, because stopping it would require him to reveal the truth." He turned slightly, catching Adrian's gaze fully. "I couldn't let that happen. Not to an innocent woman, not even for the duchy." "So you were going to, what, run? Hide her?" Adrian's voice was raw with hurt and confusion. I was going to take her to the queen, Cassian said, and watched shock ripple across every face in the courtyard. Over the Duke's head, over the duchy's laws, straight to the crown. Let Her Majesty decide if love and mercy have any place in justice. It was treason. Not the kind that got you hanged, perhaps, but the kind that ended careers, stripped titles, erased legacies. Going to the Queen meant declaring the Duke incapable of dispensing justice in his own lands. It meant political humiliation. It meant Cassian would never serve in the ducal guard again. It meant losing everything except his conscience. Adrian stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he sheathed his sword. "The Queen is in residence at the Winter Palace," he said quietly. 4 days' ride. You'll need horses, provisions, and documents to get past the royal checkpoints. He looked at Seraphine. And you'll need someone who knows the Intelligence Corps' patrol routes. Someone who can get you through without being caught and dragged back. Cassian's heart stopped. "Adrian, you can't. You think I'm letting my idiot brother commit treason alone?" Adrian's smile was sad and fierce all at once. "Someone needs to keep you from getting killed before you reach the palace. Besides," he glanced back at the guards waiting in the shadows, "I'm the one who taught them all their signals. They won't move without my order. We have maybe 10 minutes before someone reports back to the Duke that the arrest went wrong." "This will destroy you," Cassian said. "Probably." Adrian stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "But you taught me something when we were boys, remember? After Father died and the old Duke wanted to separate us, send me to the church and you to the military." Cassian remembered. He'd been 14, Adrian 8. He'd stood in the Duke's study and said, "My brother stays with me, or I don't serve the duchy at all." "You said family isn't just blood," Adrian continued. "It's who you'd ruin yourself for, who you'd burn your life down to protect." He reached out, gripped Cassian's shoulder hard. "You're my family. If you're burning, I'm holding the torch with you." Seraphine made a small sound behind them, half sob, half laugh. "You're both insane, noble and brave and completely insane." "It's a family trait," Adrian said. He turned to the guards. "Captain Narek, dismiss the men. Tell them the prisoner escaped during transfer. Initial pursuit failed. We'll resume at first light with dogs." The older guards stepped forward, confusion warring with duty on his weathered face. "Sir, that's—" "Captain Cassian was here. If the prisoner escaped, surely—" "Captain Cassian pursued her into the northern woods," Adrian said smoothly. "He sent me back to organize a proper search party. By the time I arrived here, the trail had gone cold. These things happen with clever fugitives." His voice hardened, taking on the edge of command he'd learned from their father. "Unless you're questioning my report, Captain?" Narek held his gaze for 3 heartbeats. Then he saluted, fist to chest. "No, sir. Orders understood. Men, stand down. Reform at the main garrison for briefing." As the guards filtered away into the night, Cassian felt the weight of what they'd just done settle over him like a burial shroud. There was no going back. Even if they reached the Queen, even if she ruled in Seraphine's favor, the Duke would never forgive this betrayal. Neither would the nobility who'd served under Cassian. Neither would history. But Seraphine was alive, and that had to be enough. "We leave in 20 minutes, Adrian said. "Take only what you can carry. I'll meet you at the old hunting lodge past the east gate. There are horses stabled there that won't be missed immediately." He looked at Seraphine. "Can you ride?" "Like I was born in the saddle," she said. "Good. You'll need to. We're not stopping except to change mounts." He started to leave, then paused. "Cassian, the physician's journals, where are they?" "Chapel library, hidden in Augustine's Confessions. 3rd shelf from the top, left alcove." "I'll retrieve them. We'll need proof for the Queen." Adrian hesitated, then added softly, "Thank you. for not making me choose between duty and brotherhood, for choosing first. Then he was gone, melting into shadows like he'd been trained, and Cassian was alone with the woman he'd just committed treason to protect. "I don't deserve this," Seraphine whispered. "I don't deserve either of you risking—" "You deserve justice," Cassian interrupted. "And if the duchy won't provide it, the crown will. That's not heroism, it's just what should have happened from the start." She turned to face him fully for the first time since he'd thrown himself between her and Adrian's blade. In the moonlight, she looked ethereal. Dark hair tumbling loose from its pins, violet eyes bright with unshed tears, the hollow of her throat still marked red from where his dagger had pressed. She was beautiful, yes, but that wasn't why he'd protected her. He'd protected her because he'd read those journals, read Marguerite's desperate, loving letters, read the physician's careful documentation of a woman choosing death on her own terms. And he'd understood with perfect clarity that some evils are done not from malice, but from love twisted by circumstances. Marguerite had been trying, in her broken way, to give her brother permission to live. She'd just been too damaged by duty and sacrifice to understand that Sebastian would never forgive himself for the cost.
"I loved him, you know," Seraphine said. "I still do. Even though it's been 15 years since we were anything more than polite strangers at state functions. Even though he married and produced heirs and never once looked back." She smiled, bitter and beautiful. "Love doesn't die just because it's inconvenient. I think Marguerite finally understood that, at the end." "Then we'll make sure her sacrifice means something," Cassian said. "We'll get you to the Queen, get you cleared. And then—" he trailed off, unsure. "And then I disappear," Seraphine finished. "Go somewhere far from here where Sebastian can rebuild without my ghost haunting him. Somewhere I can stop being the tragic widow and just be someone new." It should have been the right answer, the noble answer. But something in Cassian rebelled against it. "Or," he said slowly, "you stay. You face him. You make him tell the truth about what his sister did, about what you both lost. You give him the choice Marguerite never did, to love openly or let go cleanly, but not to hide in the convenient middle ground of eternal regret." Seraphine stared at him. "That would destroy him politically. Maybe. Or maybe it would free him. Maybe the duchy needs to see that their duke is human, that he loves and loses and makes mistakes like anyone else. That honor isn't about being perfect, it's about being true." "You truly believe that?" "I have to," Cassian said, "because I just burned my entire life on the belief that truth matters more than convenience. I'd like to think I wasn't completely wrong." She reached out, took his hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "Then I'll try. I'll try to be that brave. But first, we survive the journey. First, we face the Queen." "First," Cassian agreed, "we get you out of this courtyard before someone realizes Adrian's story has more holes than a beggar's coat." He squeezed her hand once, then released it. "Come on, stay close. If anyone stops us, you're my prisoner, and I'm transferring you to a secure location on the Duke's orders." They moved through Greymont like ghosts, keeping to the shadowed colonnade that ran along the eastern wall. Cassian knew every inch of this place, every guard rotation, every blind spot, every door that creaked, and every window that stuck. He'd made it his business to know. It was what made him valuable to Duke Thornwick. It was also what would make him nearly impossible to catch. They reached the east gate without incident. The guards stationed there were young, new recruits who'd served under Cassian for less than a year. They snapped to attention when they saw him, eyes carefully averted from Seraphine's bound wrists, a fiction Cassian had hastily arranged with a length of silk scarf that looked like rope in the darkness. "Captain,
We weren't informed of a transfer. Direct orders from Lord Adrian, Cassian said crisply. The prisoner is being moved to a more secure location while the investigation continues. This gate is to remain closed behind me. No one follows. Understood? Yes, sir. But should we send word to the Duke? Lord Adrian is handling all communications. Your duty is here. Hold this gate. Cassian's voice softened slightly. Trust me, Barton, this is the right thing. The young guard wavered, then nodded. Yes, sir, we'll hold. The gate opened, closed, and then they were outside the duchy's heart, standing on the frozen road that led into the hunting preserve. Cassian felt the weight of that closure like a coffin lid sealing. No turning back now, Seraphine murmured. There never was, Cassian replied. They walked in silence through the winter woods, their breath misting in the air. Above them, stars wheeled cold and distant, offering no judgment. Cassian found himself thinking about his father, about the lessons he'd taught. Loyalty is tested not in comfort, but in crisis. Any man can serve when service costs nothing. True honor is what remains when everything else is stripped away. Had always thought that meant dying for the Duke if necessary, taking the arrow, the blade, the poison cup. But maybe true honor was this, standing between an innocent and an unjust execution, even when the law said otherwise, even when it meant betraying the man you'd sworn to protect. The hunting lodge appeared through the trees, a dark silhouette against darker sky. Adrian was already there, holding 3 horses. Had changed into traveling clothes, nondescript and warm. Had also brought packs loaded with supplies, and, Cassian noted with a surge of gratitude, their mother's silver compass, the one their father had given her on their wedding day. I thought you might want this, Adrian said quietly, handing it to Cassian. For luck. For finding our way. Cassian's throat tightened. Adrian, don't. His brother's voice was rough. Don't thank me and don't apologize. We're doing this together, which means we're both right or we're both damned. I'm comfortable with either. He helped Seraphine mount, then swung onto his own horse. Besides, I was getting bored with garrison duty. When's the last time we had a proper adventure? The border revolts. When you nearly died from sepsis after taking a dagger to the gut. See? Long overdue. Adrian's grin was pure bravado, but Cassian loved him for it. We head northeast. Avoid the main roads. I've arranged dead drops along the route. Safe houses where we can rest and resupply. Most are run by operatives who owe me favors. They won't ask questions. Most? Seraphine asked. One is run by a woman who'll definitely ask questions, but she's also the only person I know who can get us through the Queen's outer defenses without triggering an alert. Adrian's smile turned sly. She's an old friend. Very old. Very good friend. You're enjoying this, Cassian accused. Immensely. For the first time in years, I'm doing something that matters more than paperwork and politics. Adrian kicked his horse into motion. Come on, we've got maybe 3 hours before the Duke realizes what happened. I'd like to be well clear of the duchy's border by then. They rode through the night, 3 shadows against the snow-pale landscape. Cassian kept expecting to hear pursuit, the horn call that would mean the deception had failed, the thunder of hooves as the ducal guard ran them down. But the night remained quiet, except for the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. As dawn broke gray and cold over the eastern hills, they crossed the boundary stones that marked the duchy's edge. Cassian looked back once, seeing Greymont in the distance, the manor towers catching first light, the walls that had been his whole world for 2 decades. Regrets? Adrian asked softly. Cassian thought about it, about the career ending, the reputation shattering, the life he'd built crumbling behind him. Then he looked at Seraphine, still alive, still free,
her face turned toward the rising sun with something like hope kindling in her eyes. "No," he said. "No regrets." They pushed deeper into the borderlands, following paths that weren't quite roads, stopping only to water the horses and chew dried meat from their packs. Adrian navigated by memory and instinct, avoiding the official checkpoints where duchy guards transitioned to crown rangers. He led them through shepherd trails and forgotten trading routes, places where the Queen's law was more legend than enforcement. On the second night, huddled in a cave while sleet hammered the landscape, Seraphine finally asked the question Cassian had been expecting. "Why?" she said. "Why risk everything for someone you barely know? I'm grateful, don't misunderstand, but I need to know why you truly did this. Not the noble reasons you told Adrian, the real reason." Cassian was quiet for a long time, watching the fire Adrian had coaxed from damp wood.
When he spoke, his voice was low enough that Adrian, on watch at the cave mouth, wouldn't hear. "My mother died in childbirth," he said. "Everyone knows that. What they don't know is that my father blamed Adrian for years. Never said it, never showed it overtly, but I could see it in how he looked at my brother sometimes, like Adrian was the price paid for happiness lost." Seraphine listened without interrupting. "When I was 14, Adrian tried to run away. He was 8 years old, and he tried to disappear into the woods because he thought he was a burden, thought everyone would be better off if he just vanished." Cassian's hands clenched. "I found him before he got far, and I realized that sometimes the greatest evil isn't malice. It's people quietly accepting injustice because challenging it is uncomfortable." Everyone knew how father felt. No one said anything. No one protected Adrian from that silent blame. "So you did," Seraphine said softly. "So I did. I made myself so essential to the duchy, so valuable, that when I demanded Adrian stay with me instead of being sent away, they had no choice but to agree. I built a reputation as the Duke's perfect knight because it gave me power. Power to protect my brother from a grief that wasn't his fault." He met her eyes across the fire. "When I read those journals, when I understood what Marguerite had done and why, I saw Adrian all over again. A person being destroyed by someone else's misplaced grief. A person everyone was willing to let suffer because intervening would be complicated." His voice hardened. "I swore I'd never let that happen again, not while I had the power to stop it." "Even if stopping it meant losing that power?" "Especially then," Cassian said. "Because power that only exists to protect itself isn't real power. It's just vanity wearing armor." Seraphine was crying silently, tears tracking through the dirt on her cheeks. "You're a better man than Sebastian realizes, better than he deserves." "I'm not doing this for the Duke. I'm doing it for you. And for every person who's ever been sacrificed on the altar of someone else's comfortable lies." He reached out, wiped away one of her tears with his thumb. "You deserved a trial. You deserved truth. If I can't give you both, I'll at least give you life. The rest you'll have to build yourself." She caught his hand, held it against her cheek. "I'm beginning to think I might want to build it. Before this, I was just existing, waiting for someone to remember I was supposed to have been loved once. But now," she laughed shakily, "now I'm running for my life with two strangers who've become the most important people I know. It's insane, but it feels like the first honest thing I've done in 15 years. Love makes cowards of the careful," Adrian called from the cave mouth, startling them both. "At least, that's what our mother used to say. Or so father told me before he died.
Right before, he also told me he never blamed me for her death, that he'd been angry at God, not at his son, and he was sorry it took him so long to say so. Cassian stared at his brother's back. He said that in his last moments, when the cavalry horse had crushed his ribs and he knew he was dying. He made me promise to tell you something. Adrian turned, his face shadowed but his eyes bright. He said, "Tell Cassian that protecting people is noble, but make sure he knows when to let them protect him back. Make sure he learns to be saved, not just to save." The words hit Cassian like a blade between the ribs. He'd spent 23 years being the shield, the sword, the immovable defense. He'd never considered that sometimes surrender, letting others step forward, letting others share the burden, might be its own kind of strength. "I'm trying," he said hoarsely. "That's why I didn't shut you out tonight, why I let you come." "I know," Adrian smiled. "You're learning, slowly, like watching a glacier shift." He sobered. "We should rest."
Tomorrow, we reach the first safe house, and the woman who runs it is going to have questions. Many, many questions. They slept in shifts, taking turns at watch. When Cassian's turn came, he stood at the cave mouth and looked out at the sleeping world, snow and stone and silence. Somewhere behind them, the Duke was searching. Somewhere ahead, the Queen was waiting, unknowing. And here, in the thin space between duty and treason, Cassian felt oddly at peace. He'd chosen, and choice, even ruinous choice, had a kind of freedom to it. The third day brought them to the safe house Adrian had promised, a mill on the edge of a tributary river, weathered and gray and surprisingly well maintained. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the water wheel turned lazily in the current. Adrian dismounted with visible nervousness. "Let me talk first. Eloise can be prickly about surprise visits." "Eloise?" Seraphine raised an eyebrow. "She taught me everything I know about intelligence work. Also broke my heart when I was 22. It's complicated." Adrian squared his shoulders and knocked. The door opened to reveal a woman in her early 40s, silver threading through auburn hair, sharp green eyes taking in the three travelers with immediate suspicion. Then she saw Adrian, and her expression transformed. Surprise, joy, exasperation warring for dominance. "Adrian Frost, you absolute fool! What have you done?" "Something heroic and possibly fatal," Adrian said cheerfully. "May we come in?" Eloise stared at him, then at Cassian, then at Seraphine. Her eyes widened with recognition. "Saints and sinners! That's Lady Ashford, the woman half the duchy is hunting for murder." She grabbed Adrian's collar, hauled him inside, and hissed, "Have you lost your mind?" "Completely," Adrian agreed. "That's why I need your help." What followed was the fastest, most efficient interrogation Cassian had ever witnessed. Eloise questioned them all, cross-referencing their stories, examining the physician's journals Adrian had brought, reading Marguerite's letters with an expression of profound sadness. Finally, she set everything down and looked at Seraphine. "You loved the Duke."
Yes.
"Still do?"
Yes.
"And you're willing to face the Queen's justice, knowing it might mean exile or worse, rather than run?"
Yes.
Eloise turned to Cassian. "You're throwing away a legendary career for a woman you barely know and a Duke who won't thank you."
Yes.
"And you," she said to Adrian, "are committing career suicide to follow your brother into the fire."
Wouldn't be the first time.
Adrian said. "Remember the Silverton job?" Despite everything, Eloise laughed. "You were so young then, so convinced you could save everyone." She sobered. "I should turn you in. I should send word to the duchy and collect the reward they're undoubtedly offering by now."
But you won't.
Adrian said softly. "Because you're the one who taught me that laws serve justice, not the other way around. When they conflict, you choose justice, every time." Eloise held his gaze for a long moment. Then she sighed. "You're going to be the death of me, Adrian Frost. Come on, I'll get you to the Winter Palace, but after that, you're on your own. I'm too old to be dodging royal investigators." She was as good as her word. Over the next 18 hours, she procured fresh horses, forged travel documents, and outlined a route that would get them past the remaining checkpoints without triggering alerts. She also gave them advice that would prove invaluable. "The Queen is in mourning," Eloise explained as they prepared to leave. "Her youngest son died 3 months ago, hunting accident. She's been unpredictable since then, harder, less forgiving of nobility who she thinks failed their duty to care for their people." She looked at Seraphine. "If you want her mercy, you'll need to appeal not to her sense of romance, but to her sense of justice. Make her see that you're a victim of a system that values appearances over truth. Make her angry on your behalf." "I can do that," Seraphine said. "Good. And you too," Eloise turned to the brothers. "Remember that helping a fugitive flee justice is one crime. Convincing the Queen to overturn a duke's ruling is another. You're not just asking for mercy. You're asking her to publicly rebuke one of her most powerful vassals. She'll need ironclad proof and political cover. Think about what you can offer her in exchange." Cassian frowned. "We're bringing her the truth. Isn't that enough?" "Truth is a currency, but so is power. If you want the Queen to spend her political capital on this case, you need to give her something in return. A concession, an advantage, something that makes overruling Duke Thornwick worthwhile beyond simple justice." It was a cynical view, but Cassian recognized its wisdom. They weren't just seeking mercy. They were asking the crown to intervene in duchy affairs, which could set precedents that rippled through the entire realm. The Queen would need justification beyond sentiment. "I'll think on it," he said. Eloise smiled sadly. "You're good men, both of you. I hope the Queen sees that. I hope it matters." Then they were riding again, the final stretch toward the Winter Palace. The landscape changed as they traveled. Fewer farms, more forest, the land rising toward the foothills where the royal residence perched like a crown on a mountainside. They saw crown rangers twice, but Adrian's forged documents held. The rangers waved them through, bored and cold and uninterested in 3 minor nobles traveling for the season. It was snowing when they finally glimpsed the palace through the trees. White stone and soaring towers, banners snapping in the mountain wind. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once, a monument to power that made even Greymont look small. "Last chance to turn back," Cassian said to Seraphine. She shook her head. "I've come this far. I'm seeing it through." But her hands trembled on the reins. They approached the gates as evening fell, 3 travelers requesting an audience with the Queen's Justice Minister. It took an hour of bureaucracy and suspicion before they were finally admitted, not to the palace proper, but to an antechamber where petitioners waited for attention. It was there, in a room of marble and cold light, that everything changed. A door opened. A woman entered. Not the Queen, but someone who radiated authority nonetheless. She was perhaps 60, silver-haired and ramrod straight, wearing the blue robes of the Royal Inquisitor. Her eyes swept over them like a blade. "Lady Seraphine Ashford," she said, "you're either extraordinarily brave or catastrophically foolish to come here." "Both, Your Grace," Seraphine said, standing. "I seek justice from the crown, not mercy. I seek the truth to be heard, whatever consequences follow." The Inquisitor's gaze moved to Cassian and Adrian. "And you too. The Duke's most trusted knight and his brother, the intelligence officer. Both now fugitives from duchy law. Both risking treason charges for a woman accused of murdering the Duke's own sister." She paused. "Why?" "Because the law failed her," Cassian said simply. "Because we found evidence the duchy chose to ignore. Because sometimes the right thing is also the hardest thing, and someone has to do it anyway." The inquisitor studied them for a long, breathless moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. "The queen will see you, now, tonight. She's been following your flight with considerable interest. Duke Thornwick sent word 3 days ago demanding your arrest and return. Her Majesty chose to wait and see if you'd actually make it here. She's pleased you did. She values courage, even foolish courage."
"Then she'll hear our case?" Seraphine asked. "She'll hear it, but I warn you, she'll also demand answers you may not want to give. She'll tear apart your story looking for lies, and if she finds them, you'll wish you'd never left the duchy." The inquisitor's voice softened slightly. "But if your truth holds, if you can prove that Lady Marguerite's death was suicide staged as murder, then yes, you may find the justice you seek." She led them deeper into the palace, through corridors lined with guards and courtiers who stared at the bedraggled travelers with open curiosity. Cassian felt the weight of those stares, felt the 1,000 ways this could still go wrong. But beside him, Seraphine walked with her head high, and Adrian moved with the quiet confidence of a man who'd already decided his fate. They were ushered into a smaller receiving room, intimate by palace standards, but still grand enough to steal breath. A fire roared in the hearth. Tapestries depicted the realm's history, and there, standing by the window with her back to them, was Queen Isidora. She turned as they entered, and Cassian saw immediately why she'd held the throne for 30 years, despite rebellions and plots. She was elegant and iron, grief-worn but unbroken, her dark eyes seeing everything and missing nothing. "So," she said, voice like honey and steel, "these are the traitors or heroes who've caused such an uproar in Duke Thornwick's lands. I've been eager to meet you. Kneel." They knelt, the 3 of them, heads bowed in perfect synchrony. "Now," the Queen said, moving closer, "tell me why I shouldn't send you back in chains and be done with this disruption. And do be creative. I dislike boring pleas for mercy." Cassian raised his head, met her eyes directly, a breach of protocol that made the Inquisitor suck in a breath. But he needed her to see him, really see him, not just another supplicant. "Because your Majesty has the power to do more than dispense mercy," he said. "You have the power to correct injustice before it calcifies into history. Lady Marguerite Thornwick wasn't murdered. She chose death on her own terms, for her own reasons, and framed Lady Ashford to accomplish goals that seemed noble to a dying woman. The duchy knows this, or suspects it, but admitting it would complicate the comfortable narrative of jealous villainy. So they're choosing to execute an innocent woman rather than face uncomfortable truths. And you decided to circumvent your Duke's justice and appeal to mine." The Queen's voice was unreadable. "We decided that justice matters more than convenience," Adrian said. "That protecting an innocent life matters more than preserving political comfort. If that's treason, we'll accept the consequences. But we won't apologize for trying." Queen Isidora studied them in silence. Then she sat, gesturing for them to rise. "Show me your evidence, all of it. The journals, the letters, everything you've gathered. I'll read it tonight. You'll remain in palace custody, comfortable custody, but guarded nonetheless, while I investigate. If your evidence is compelling, I'll summon Duke Thornwick to answer for his handling of this case. If it's not," she let the implication hang. "We understand, Your Majesty," Seraphine said. "Do you?" The Queen leaned forward. "Because if I rule in your favor, Lady Ashford, I'll be publicly questioning a duke's judgment. I'll be setting a precedent that crown justice supersedes duchy law when the two conflict. Do you understand the political upheaval that could cause?
The whispers that I'm undermining my own vassal's authority? I understand, Seraphine said quietly. And I also understand that the alternative is accepting that power shields the powerful from accountability, that dukes can execute who they please, and the crown will look away to preserve harmony. Is that the precedent your majesty wishes to set? The queen's eyes flashed, but with interest, not anger. You're either courageous or suicidal. I'm genuinely unsure which. Can't it be both? Seraphine smiled sadly. I've spent 15 years being neither. I think I'm overdue for extremes. Despite everything, the queen laughed. I like you. I don't know if I believe you, but I like you. Very well, you'll have your investigation. If nothing else, this will be the most interesting week the court has had since Lord Pemberton's peacock escaped during the winter ball and terrorized 3 ambassadors. She signaled the inquisitor. Take them to the East Wing guest quarters. Comfortable but guarded. No contact with the outside until I've reached a decision. And bring me those journals. I'll start reading tonight. As they were led away, Cassian felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. They'd made it. They'd reached the queen. But now the waiting began, and with it the knowledge that their fates hung on the whims of a grieving monarch who valued order almost as much as justice. The guest quarters were indeed comfortable. Private rooms with soft beds and warm fires, servants bringing food and wine. But the guards outside were very real, very armed, and very clear that leaving was not an option. Cassian stood at his window, watching snow fall over the palace gardens, and wondered what Duke Thornwick was doing at this moment. Raging at the betrayal? Grieving for his sister? Planning how to punish the knight who'd been his right hand? Or perhaps, somewhere deep in the private chambers where nobody saw, allowing himself to cry for the woman he'd loved and lost and never quite let go. Cassian. He turned to find Adrian at the connecting door between their rooms. His brother looked exhausted, shadows deep under his eyes. Can't sleep either, Cassian asked. I keep thinking about what the queen said, about setting precedents, about political costs. Adrian moved to the window, stood beside him. We might win the case and still lose everything. Even if Seraphine is exonerated, even if we're not executed for treason, we'll never go back to what we were. I know. Do you? Adrian's voice was raw. Because I'm not sure you've really accepted what that means. You were the Duke's champion, the perfect knight. Men wanted to be you. Now you'll be the man who betrayed his Duke. The cautionary tale they tell young officers about the danger of letting emotion override duty. Good, Cassian said, surprising himself with the vehemence. Let me be the cautionary tale, because maybe then, the next time someone sees injustice, they'll remember that someone tried to stop it. Someone chose the person over the system, and maybe, just maybe, they'll be brave enough to try too. Adrian stared at him. Then, slowly, he smiled. When did you become wise? I have no idea. Possibly when I threw myself between you and a sword. Cassian clasped his brother's shoulder. We're in this together. Whatever happens, no regrets. No regrets, Adrian echoed. They stood together at the window, watching snow bury the world in white silence, and waited for the queen to decide their fates. 3 days passed. 3 days of comfortable imprisonment, of meals brought by silent servants, of questions from the inquisitor that felt like surgical strikes seeking weakness. 3 days of waiting, while somewhere in the palace, Queen Isidora read and investigated and deliberated. On the 4th day, they were summoned to the throne room. The space was overwhelming. Vaulted ceilings, columns of white marble, the throne itself a monument of power carved from midnight stone and inlaid with silver. Courtiers lined the walls. Hundreds of nobles and functionaries gathered to witness whatever judgment the queen would pronounce. And there, standing before the throne, looking haggard and furious, was Duke Sebastian Thornwick. He saw them enter, and his face went white, then red, then white again.
Cassian met his eyes and held the gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to show shame for doing what the Duke should have done himself. "Kneel," the Inquisitor commanded. They knelt, Cassian, Adrian, and Seraphine facing the throne as Queen Isidora emerged from behind a privacy screen, her mourning blacks replaced by royal purple and gold. She mounted the throne like a general taking a battlement, radiating controlled fury. "We are gathered," she said, her voice carrying to the farthest corners of the vast room, to address a matter that strikes at the heart of crown justice. An accused murderess fleeing duchy law. 2 officers of that duchy aiding her escape. A duke demanding their immediate return and execution. And evidence suggesting that the original crime may never have occurred. The crowd murmured, shocked whispers rippling through courtiers. "Duke Thornwick," the queen continued, "step forward." The duke obeyed, his movements stiff with rage. "Your Majesty, these fugitives—" "Will speak when I give them leave," the queen interrupted coldly. "You, however, will answer my questions now. Did you investigate the evidence that Lady Marguerite may have poisoned herself? There was no credible evidence of— Answer yes or no, Duke Thornwick." Sebastian's jaw clenched. "We examined the possibility briefly." "And dismissed it. Why?" "Because the witnesses were clear, because Lady Ashford had motive and opportunity, because—" He stopped, seeming to realize the trap. "Because acknowledging your sister's suicide would require you to explain why she chose such a dramatic method," the queen finished. "It would require revealing that she sought to free you from an obligation to remain distant from a woman you'd loved most of your life. It would require admitting that your own private affairs had become so tangled that your sister felt death was the only way to untie them." Her voice could have cut glass. "Is that not correct?" The throne room was utterly silent now. "Your Majesty, my personal feelings are irrelevant to—" "Your personal feelings led to a miscarriage of justice," the queen said flatly. "I've read the journals. I've read your sister's letters. I've had my own physicians review the evidence. Lady Marguerite was dying. She chose her end. And she deliberately framed Lady Ashford as a final act of twisted love for you." The queen stood, her presence filling the space like thunder. "You knew this. Perhaps not with certainty, but you suspected. And you chose to let an innocent woman hang rather than face the scandal of truth." "I would have pardoned her," Sebastian said hoarsely. "At the last moment, I would have—" "Cowardice," the queen spat. "Waiting until the executioner's block to grant mercy so you could seem magnanimous while still maintaining the lie. So you could let everyone believe the narrative your sister crafted while secretly feeling noble for staying the blade. She descended from the throne, stood eye to eye with the Duke. I have ruled for 30 years, Duke Thornwick. I have made hard choices and borne their costs openly. What I will not tolerate is rulers who hide behind false justice because the truth is uncomfortable." She turned to the courtiers. "Let it be known, Lady Marguerite Thornwick took her own life. Lady Seraphine Ashford is innocent of murder. The duchy's case against her is void. She is free, with the crown's full exoneration and protection." Seraphine made a sound between a sob and a laugh. "As for Captain Cassian Frost and Lord Adrian Frost," the queen continued, They acted in service of justice when duchy law failed. While their methods were irregular and required them to defy their duke's authority, they brought a miscarriage of justice to the crown's attention and provided evidence to correct it. For this, they are pardoned of any charges of aiding a fugitive. Cassian felt relief flood through him, dizzying and profound.
But the queen wasn't finished. "However," she said, her voice hardening again, "their actions cannot be without consequence. They broke chain of command. They fled duchy lands with a prisoner. They committed technical treason in appealing over their duke's head to the crown." She looked at them, her expression unreadable. "Therefore, they are stripped of their ranks in the duchy service, and barred from holding similar positions in Duke Thornwick's lands henceforth." Adrian exhaled slowly. Cassian simply nodded. It was a fair price. "But," the queen added, and now there was something like satisfaction in her voice, "they may apply for positions in the crown's direct service, should they choose. We have need of men who understand that justice outranks politics. Men who will stand between innocence and injustice, even when it costs them everything." She smiled then, sharp and approving. "Consider yourselves invited to serve the realm, gentlemen. I suspect you'll find crown service has its own challenges. But at least you'll be serving justice directly, without the complications of ducal politics." "Your Majesty," Cassian said, finding his voice, "we would be honored." "Good. Report to the Inquisitor tomorrow morning. She'll assign your first duties." The queen turned back to Sebastian. "As for you, Duke Thornwick, you'll return to your lands and ensure that your sister's truth is known. You'll publicly acknowledge her suicide and exonerate Lady Ashford. You'll do this because it's right, and because if you don't, I'll send the crown's historians to do it for you, and they'll be far less kind in their recounting." "Your Majesty," Sebastian said, his voice broken, "I never meant for—" "I know what you meant and didn't mean. I know you loved her, both of them, your sister and Lady Ashford. I know you were trapped between duty and desire until you couldn't see straight anymore." Her voice softened, just fractionally. "I also know that pain doesn't justify abandoning justice."
"You have 1 year to set your duchy in order, Duke Thornwick. 1 year to prove you can rule with wisdom and courage rather than convenient lies. If you succeed, well, speak no more of this. If you fail—" She left the threat unfinished. Sebastian bowed deeply. "I understand, Your Majesty. I will not fail again." "See that you don't." Dismissed. As the courtiers began to file out, buzzing with gossip and scandal, the queen gestured for Seraphine to approach. "Lady Ashford, a word." Seraphine climbed the steps to the throne, moving like someone in a dream. The queen studied her, then spoke quietly enough that only Seraphine could hear. "He still loves you, you know. It's written all over his wretched face. The question is, do you still want him? Or has this ordeal shown you that loving a man too cowardly to fight for you isn't worth the cost?" Seraphine was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I think I need time to discover who I am when I'm not defined by loving him. When I'm not the tragic widow, or the scandalous lover, or the falsely accused murderess. Just Seraphine, whoever that is." The queen smiled. "A wise answer. You may stay at court if you wish. I'm always in need of ladies with spine and intelligence. Or you may go wherever you please, with the crown's protection and a stipend to see you established. May I think on it, Your Majesty?"
Take all the time you need. You've earned it." As Seraphine descended, the queen caught Cassian's eye and nodded once, a gesture of respect between warriors who understood sacrifice. Then she was gone, disappearing behind the privacy screen, leaving them in the echoing throne room with the ruins of their old lives and the uncertain promise of new ones. Duke Thornwick approached slowly, his eyes never leaving Seraphine. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely, "for all of it, for not being brave enough, for nearly letting you die to preserve my own comfort, for—" "I know," Seraphine interrupted gently. "I know, Sebastian, and someday, perhaps, I'll forgive you, but not today. Today I need to breathe without feeling your shadow across my lungs." He flinched like she'd struck him, but he nodded. "I deserve that. I deserve worse. If there's anything I can do, love someone better next time," she said. "Love someone brave enough to demand you be brave too. That's all." Then she walked past him, head high, and Cassian felt something settle in his chest. She was going to be all right. They all were. Differently than before, but perhaps better. Adrian fell into step beside him as they left the throne room. "So, crown service. Think they'll send us somewhere terrible?" "Definitely," Cassian said. "Think we'll regret this?" Cassian thought about the Duke's face, the Queen's respect, Seraphine's freedom. Thought about his father's words. Make sure he learns to be saved, not just to save. "No," he said, "I don't think I will." They emerged into the palace courtyard where snow was falling again, soft and clean, covering everything in white. Somewhere in the city below, bells were ringing. Evening prayer or celebration, Cassian couldn't tell. But the sound was beautiful. Behind them, Duke Sebastian Thornwick stood alone in the throne room, staring at the empty space where Seraphine had been, and began, finally, to truly grieve. And in the Queen's private chambers, Isadora sat at her desk and wrote to her remaining children. "Today I saw what courage looks like. 2 men who knew the cost and paid it anyway. A woman who chose truth over convenient death. Remember this when you rule. Justice isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. And sometimes the people who enforce it must sacrifice everything, reputation, position, comfort, to stand in the gap between power and innocence. Find those people, protect them, because they are rarer than jewels and infinitely more valuable." 3 months later, Cassian and Adrian stood on the walls of Northwatch Fortress, looking out over the restless northern border where the Queen's law met wilderness. They wore new uniforms, Crown Rangers, elite forces answering only to the Royal Inquisitor. It was dangerous work, thankless work, exactly the kind of work their father had trained them for. "Any regrets?" Adrian asked, echoing the question from that first night when they'd crossed the duchy border. Cassian thought about it, about Seraphine, who'd taken a position at court and was thriving as one of the Queen's advisors. About Duke Thornwick, who was slowly rebuilding his reputation through genuine reform and transparency. About the legend they'd become, the knights who chose injustice over loyalty and somehow survived. "No," he said, "no regrets." "Good," Adrian said, "because I just got word that there's a village in the Eastern Highlands being terrorized by someone claiming to be a resurrected border lord. The Inquisitor wants us to investigate." "Sounds ridiculous. Sounds like an adventure." They looked at each other and grinned, the same reckless grins they'd worn as boys racing through Greymont's rose gardens, before duty and death and complicated loyalties had taught them the weight of choices. "Then let's go save someone," Cassian said. And they did. Far to the south, in the duchy's private cemetery, fresh flowers appeared on Lady Marguerite's grave every week without fail. No one knew who brought them, but if you ask the gardener, he'd tell you he sometimes saw a tall figure in a dark cloak kneeling at the stone in the hours before dawn. The Duke,
paying respects to the sister who'd loved him enough to die for his happiness, even if she'd been wrong about what would make him happy. And on a hillside overlooking the cemetery, sometimes a woman in gray would stand watching, her expression unreadable. She never approached, never left flowers of her own. Just stood witness to grief that was finally, honestly expressed. Seraphine Ashford, learning what it meant to live for herself rather than for a love that had never quite been allowed to breathe. The world turned, seasons changed, and three people who'd nearly been destroyed by love and duty and impossible choices learned, slowly, to build new lives from the rubble. Justice had been served, truth had been told, and though the cost had been high, reputations shattered, positions lost, hearts broken and remade, they'd all survived. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes survival was its own kind of victory. And in the quiet moments between crisis, when Cassian stood on the fortress walls and watched the stars wheel overhead, he thought about his father's words and his mother's loss, and the brother who'd followed him into the fire without hesitation. He thought about Seraphine's courage and the Duke's cowardice turned redemption and the Queen's iron-edged mercy. He thought about the arrow he'd taken at 17, the oath he'd sworn at 23, the execution he'd prevented at 37. And he understood, finally, what his father had been trying to teach him all along. Honor wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about always serving the same master or never making mistakes. Honor was about standing in the gap between innocence and injustice, even when, especially when, it cost you everything. Honor was about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. Honor was about being brave enough to be saved as well as to save. And if that made him a traitor to some and a hero to others, well, he could live with that. He could live with the man he'd become by refusing to let an innocent woman die. He could live with choosing his conscience over his career.
He could live with the knowledge that somewhere in the duchy a duke was learning to be better, and a woman was learning to be free, and a brother was standing watch beside him against whatever came next. He could live with all of it, and so he did. The end came not with trumpets or grand pronouncements, but with a quiet sunset over the northern mountains, two brothers standing shoulder to shoulder, and the knowledge that they'd done right when doing right had seemed impossible. That was enough. That was everything. And the story passed into legend. The Duke's knight who'd risked everything to protect his brother's enemy, and found in that choice not ruin, but redemption. Not ending, but beginning. Not death, but life. And love, messy, complicated, impossibly brave love, continuing on in all its imperfect glory, teaching everyone it touched that sometimes the greatest courage is simply refusing to let injustice have the final word.